on Republic TV. Shravan and Abhishek are also joining us on the broadcast, and the story is getting very, very big of Amnesty backtracking on this entire controversy. Let me go across and introduce also Omer Kabir. Omer Kabir is an Israel-based journalist. He's a tech columnist, climate crisis reporter. He's joining us live. Omer, good afternoon. Can you hear me, Omer?
Yes, I can hear you. It's Omer, by the way, not Omar.
Omer.
Yeah.
I hope I got that correct. Omer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Omer. Thank you for joining us, Omer. So what's going on, Omer? You know, we've been telling here in India, when we looked at these reports, the language that is used, and I'd like to bring in my colleagues Shravan and Abhishek, who are also live from New Delhi. So you're in Tel Aviv, I'm in Mumbai, and we have our colleagues Shravan and Abhishek also live with us. They're live in Delhi. Why don't you tell us what Amnesty told you about the origin of these numbers? Now, if this was not an NSO list, then where did this come from, and how was it marketed as an NSO or a Pegasus list?
Well, NSO actually didn't tell me what the origin of the list. The origin of the list is still somewhere between a mystery and some assumptions that we have and theories we're working on. What they did say, and they are insisting that they've been saying it from the start, is that the list is not directly connected to NSO. It's not a list of NSO's Pegasus targets, but it is a list of, of people or phone numbers that have been of interest to countries that are, or some of them are, clients of NSO.
Some of them. Now, what did Amnesty have to say about this entire story, Omer? What did Amnesty have to say? Now, if I'm just going through the report, I'm going through the report that you have filed, and if Amnesty has clarified that the list of 50,000 phone numbers is not directly related to the NSO, Omer, is that correct?
Yes, this is correct.
Then how is it that media, and do you see that different media houses are saying different things about the story now? Now the language is different, and how did it become a story about NSO? Who takes onus for it now?
So the consortium behind the story, the 18 media organizations and Amnesty, have been quite systematic from the start, and their message right now, their message to me and to other media in Israel, didn't change what they've been saying from the start. What was happening is that a lot of other media outlets that picked up the story and did follow-up stories weren't as careful in representing the list, and some of them, actually a lot of them, characterized it as a list of NSO's targets, construing that every number on this list was a number targeted by Pegasus software. The consortium, the Forbidden Stories Consortium and Amnesty never said that, but they did tie NSO to the list very prominently, saying in every reporting they have, this is a list of people of interest by NSO's clients. And then later explaining that there's no information, or you can say conclusively that the phone number on the list were targeted by Pegasus, and the provenance of the list is not conclusive, but the story was connected to NSO, the list was connected to NSO in every reporting done by the media behind the story, even though the connection was never really satisfactory, at least to me, explained.
Yeah, I have my colleagues who will also be constantly live with us now, and they have a couple of questions. Shravan and Abhishek also with us. Shravan, Abhishek, who'd like to go first? Omer is with us, and what he's saying is startling.
I can't hear him.
Please, my colleague Abhishek has a question for you, Omer. Abhishek, we were not getting your audio. Can you go again? We just lost your audio there. Abhishek, can you ask that question again to Omer?
I'm asking you, Ranjan. So, I want to ask him which number to believe. Do we believe 50,000? Do we believe 180 journalists? Do we believe 121 journalists or 37 journalists? Or do we believe 10 NSO clients? Or do we believe 20 countries? Because NSO is very clear. They deal only with the governments of nations and not private entities. So the forbidden stories statement, for example, says that these records with the forbidden stories, the phones of
at least 180 journalists were selected in 20 countries by at least 10 NSO clients. Now, does that mean, going by numbers, that governments of whatever NSO clients were snooping outside their jurisdictions also? I mean, does NSO even allow that? Omer, if you can clear doubts on this.
NSO usually does not allow governments to snoop outside their jurisdiction, but it is possible in some cases. As to your number, well, the 50,000 list is almost definitely not a list of NSO's targets. In the whole time NSO is operating, it's quite impossible that they have 50,000 targets in all of the history, not much like a list that refers only to part of the time. NSO's tool is not a mass surveillance tool. It's a very targeted, specific surveillance to a person or a few persons. License to NSO's tools are very much expensive. It's in the millions of dollars for a few licenses, and each license is one target. So it's not like something you can deploy massively on a scale of 50,000. The 180 journalists you mentioned is 180 numbers of journalists found on the list. So again, these people were some interest perhaps to some governments, some of them have NSO clients. We don't know if the interest was legitimate or illegitimate, but some interest. The numbers that we can say with most certainty is that 37 phones examined physically by Amnesty and peer-reviewed by Citizen Lab in University of Toronto. These 37 phones found traces of a Pegasus software that was installed on them, or that were attempts to install Pegasus software on these phones. Of these phones, we know that 12 belong to journalists, but this is the thing that I feel we can say for sure. 37 numbers that were examined physically.
Omer, I have a question.
Yes, yeah, sure.
I have a question. Good that you explained this. But then again, I have a question. If you say 37 phones were physically verified, of which 12 are journalists, from around the world, remember. But in India, we are getting a list which has 20 odd journalists. So if only 12 were journalists of the 37 physically verified phones, how come we have 20 journalist names coming from India? Number one. Number two, if you believe this universe of 50,000, how much does it really cost per number for the NSO to provide its services? Because that gives an idea of how expensive it is and why it might be an exercise in futility given the massive intelligence apparatuses that essentially states have at their disposal.
So your first question as to the 20 numbers in India, I'm not aware of those numbers. I would assume that of the 180 numbers of journalists on the list, 20 of them were of Indian journalists, and this is number from the list. That a number appearing on the list does not mean that this number were a target of NSO, of Pegasus, or that it was infected. It only means that it could be of possible interest to government. Some of them are clients of NSO. So I assume these 20 numbers of Indian journalists were of some interest to the Indian government, perhaps, though the interest might be legitimate, might be in a course of a criminal investigation. They might not even know that they were journalists when the numbers were entered into the system from which this list is taken. As to your second questions, I don't know the number of how the figure of the sum the NSOs take for each license. We believe it's in the millions of dollars. We know NSO contracts are a few million of dollars a year. And usually it's for very limited number of targets. It's not two-figure number. Actually, it can be. I'm sorry, I will correct myself. According to NSO, each client has in a year around 100 targets. And I'm sorry, I'm misleading you again. I'm sorry, yes, okay, yes, I got it. Sorry about the confusion. NSO claims it has 35 clients using Pegasus software. Each client targets about 100 phone numbers a year. This is the number we know. I don't know how much they pay for each target, but it's millions or it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's very, very much expensive.
It's very expensive, exactly. So in that case, wouldn't the states or the clients, which are governments across the world, would be using the facilities they have at their disposal? I mean, why would, for example, the government of India want to snoop on King of Morocco? I mean, the list by itself is a little outlandish, given the claims that have been made. And the play of words which you brought out, Omer, about Amnesty outrightly denying now, and the play of words we are seeing in other stories. And on this, actually, Shawan can join me on this. Every platform, if you go by their words, for example, the NYT says, the New York Times, the journalist consortium linked NSO to a leaked list of more than 50,000 mobile numbers from more than 50 countries. Now you see forbidden stories, which originally investigated says 20 countries. By the time NYT publishes it, it becomes 50 countries. So is there a pattern of amplifying misleading information as part of some kind of agenda between these platforms?
I don't want to comment about reporting. I haven't seen it, and has been done by other journalists, other media. The story is very complex. There's a lot of numbers running around. It is difficult to put a hand on which number refers to what. It might be that the Forbidden Stories has identified 20 countries as NSO's clients, but there are other countries on the list that are not NSO's clients, and this is why maybe there's a higher number. I'm not sure. But it is very complex to get a handle on all the numbers in the stories. 50,000, 180, 600 politicians, 67 phones examined, 37 phones identified. It might be there's some confusion. I don't believe it's intended to misrepresent the stories. Maybe just some confusion.
Well, my last question before I hand over to Niranjan and Shawan. Okay, Shawan has a question. Let Shawan take the question first.
Omer, you have written extensively about this, and hence I'm asking you this question about legitimacy. The reason being that today, with Amnesty International writing to you, delinking themselves from this entire list altogether, how legitimate are these numbers to begin with? Because at the end of the day, there is a lot of conjecture. Because based on conjectures, you've had media outlets coming to a conclusion that governments have carried out this snooping activity. But with Amnesty completely delinking themselves, perhaps the premise is completely, demolished.
I want to make something clear. Amnesty did not delink themselves from the story. They clarified something that they had been saying all along from day one, that this is not a list of NSO target. This is a list of number of people of interest to clients of NSO. They've been saying that consistently from the start, and they are clarifying right now. And it's not, by the way, the statement was not made only to me. It was made to all the media in Israel. It's a blank statement sent to every journalist in Israel covering the story, and published by other media outlets in Israel. So it's not something that was sent exclusively to me. I'm sorry. So Amnesty is not delinking itself from the story. They are standing by their statement from the start. They clarified it because a lot of other media outlets, not connected directly with the story, misrepresented the claims and claimed that, well, every number on the list or is possibly or necessarily a number of a target by Pegasus software. The list is problematic, but there are other findings that are not as problematic. They are very secure. The 37 phones examined by Amnesty and peer reviewed by Citizen Lab are, I believe, do in fact, were snooped on by Pegasus, by NSO. And this is another major finding in the research that is not as problematic as the list. The list is problematic, and I'll agree to it. Was misconstrued by a lot of media, most of them not connected to the original story.
Exactly. And then that's the question. Shawan, I'll just take one question and I'll hand it to you. Omer, now the kind of headlines that we are seeing, very conclusive headlines by some of these groups that agreed to, take the story from Amnesty and play it. They have concluded almost that the names that have come out, including that of politicians, including some sitting ministers, they've almost concluded that they were snooped on by Pegasus. They've confirmed that. Now, those are the kind of headlines, and they've gone on to not just, loosely write it. They conclusively have said that these ministers and journalists were actually spied on using NSO and Pegasus. So, do you see that as a dangerous sort of a pattern now that the story has been published around the world, right? Do you see an element of, mischievous headline spinning also there, conveniently being done?
So if there's a story that claims that just the appearance of a number on the list means that it was attacked by Pegasus or targeted by Pegasus, this story will be wrong, just based on something on the appearance of number on the list. Amnesty has never claimed that, and this is why they are clarifying now. The list does not equal Pegasus targets. They are saying it very clearly, as they have been from the start. And yes, I think it is dangerous because it gives the wrong impression of people being targeted, of uses being done to Pegasus. It's not correct, it's not truthful, and it hurts people who oppose NSO like myself, because it distracts from the real findings, the base finding of this research and other research that have been published over the last 5 years, starting with the Citizen Lab research 5 years ago that I was one of the first journalists to write about. It makes me that much more harder to criticize the company, to regulate it, because now every time there will become a research about NSO, they will just claim, well, the last time when you said it was 50,000 number, later we found out it wasn't true. So how can we believe this research? So it is very dangerous in that aspect.
Question, Shawan.
Well, Abhishek, you've had a question with Omer, and then perhaps
I have a question. Omer, I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yes. So my final question to you is that given the mystery, to use your words, and the problem around these numbers, since NSO is an Israeli company, Israeli firm, you think the Israel government can help us demystify this issue?
Well, yes, they can. The Israeli government definitely can. They can allow NSO to give us more information about its clients and the investigation of false or misuse that they did in these various clients. They definitely can. I believe they won't. The Israeli government has a lot of interest in operation of NSO, and by the way, other Israeli companies, not well as known as NSO, such as Kabir and other names, that are actually competitors of NSO, that are also selling spyware software to other countries. So it's not just NSO. The Israeli regulator has a lot of interest in these companies continuing to operate in the way they're operating now, in secret, with them selling the software to governments that are not exactly democracies, such as Saudi Arabia, such as the UAE, because of political interests, security interests, financial interests, and other interests of the Israeli government. And we just saw a story in the New York Times last week by my colleague, Israeli journalist Ronen Bergman, claiming that after the murder of the Saudi journalist in the Turkish embassy, in the Saudi embassy in Turkey, the Israeli government came to those companies, NSO and other companies, and asked them to continue working with Saudi Arabia, to not stop working in the country, and even to return to working in the country. One of the companies has suspended operations there. So the Israeli government, though it can do a lot, I won't believe it will.
Well, one final question, Omer, before we let you go, with regards to where are we really heading? Because we've seen this happening in the past too, in the year 2019, and then now yet another. And I would want to focus on this one word that you've used, the misusing of the very list. I want you to elaborate a little bit before you go. When you say misuse of the entire list and the conclusion that have been basically been made by the outlets, what does that essentially mean? And what next, perhaps?
Well, I haven't seen the reporting in India. I can only talk about reporting I've seen mostly in the US, in Britain, and here in Israel. A lot of organizations, most of them not connected to the consortium or Amnesty, just following up on the story, misconstrued the list as saying that every number on the list is a number that has been targeted by Pegasus. This was the problem here. What it means going forward, it means we have to be more responsible in our reporting and to focus on the real significant findings of this story, 37 numbers that have been checked and been identified as having traces of Pegasus in them, which builds on other stories from the last 5 years. Just this last December, there was a report from Citizen Lab that established that 37 phones by Al Jazeera journalists were targeted by Pegasus. It was based on analysis of these phones. The list is problematic, but there are a lot of other important findings, and we should focus on them.
Okay, Omer, I think we'll leave it at that. And it was good to talk to you. It was good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us here on Republic TV. Shravan and Abhishek, I think this is going to be, because Omer, one last question, right?
Sure.
What's happening here is the entire parliament has sort of been deadlocked. The parliament proceedings in India have been deadlocked because of this so-called Snoopgate scandal, right? Because the impression given and the comments made are that people were actually spied on and that it actually happened, and numbers of politicians were also snooped on using Pegasus. Now, if what you're saying and if what Amnesty has said is true, and you have them on record, and you spoke about their statement that was given out to the Israeli media, it really brings the situation down to a situation, brings the situation down to almost a fake news situation, right? Because in the media, the headlines that were spun, etc., people were given to believe that it actually happened, right? And if it did not actually happen, if it was a list of potential interests, see how dangerous this can be. We don't know whether the parliament will continue to be deadlocked, but do you see the story changing across the world now that Amnesty has come out with this statement? Do you see some of these media groups pulling back?
It's far from me to presume what will happen in a complex international system. You said, is it fake news? Well, if I didn't see the reports in India, but if a number was reported as being targeted by Pegasus just on its basis of being on the list, then yes, this is classic fake news. I don't know how much impact Amnesty statement will have. They are not saying something that they haven't been saying from the start. But maybe now when they are clarifying it, some media will stop and listen and look at the things they written and maybe realize that they need to be more careful and more circumspect with their stories and how they analyze and present the findings on the list itself.